Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Behind the Headlines, and in this programme we'll be discussing Saudi Arabia, particularly Saudi Arabia's bid to host the biggest sporting tournament in the world, the World Cup in 2034, and one of the venues is to be Neom, this futuristic city that hasn't even been built yet. We'll be asked what's behind Saudi Arabia's drive for modernisation and to showcase the nation on the world, particularly as we also discuss the Saudi Pro League. And we'll also be talking about the prospects of a Saudi-Israeli peace agreement. So we'll be asking what's happening to Saudi Arabia. Regan, it's great you're back on Behind the Headlines after being in Israel last week. And I think for our viewers as well, we got a fascinating story to cover, and that's the dynamic and the changes that are taking place in Saudi Arabia with Mohammed bin Salman's 2030 vision that looks to actually transform this once desert kingdom into what is now fast becoming one of the world's leading sporting arenas.
Yeah, it's really incredible, Simon. We have seen in the past few years growing drive in Saudi Arabia to modernise and to, in some ways, re-portray itself. Its image has been transformed already to some degree. It's definitely wanting to present itself as being at the forefront of innovation and technology, especially through the construction of this modern wonder of the world, if they succeed in it, Neom, which it's truly one of those stories that you look at and you think this is something straight out of Blade Runner or some science fiction film. But they've also been very heavily in the news in the past couple of years due to extremely expensive football transfers. And
I think this summer in particular.
Yeah, this summer has been amazing just to see the amount of money that is being used to bring high-class, top-rate football stars over to Saudi Arabia to play in its league. Of course, Ronaldo is there, and I'm seeing, previously I would never have seen Saudi football club shirts. Maybe the Saudi international team, I might see a jersey here or there, very rarely, but now I'm seeing a range of Saudi League football jerseys just on the street being worn by people who are Middle Eastern and Western alike, just because of the buzz that it's bringing to that league with these top names.
No, it's certainly one to look out for. I know the Premier League are kind of worried about the Saudi Pro League, football league, with the likes attracting, as you know, the 5 times Ballon d'Or winner Cristiano Ronaldo back in December of 2022.
Neymar as well.
Neymar. Karim Benzema, the superb French international forward for Real Madrid. Our own England international, Jordan Henderson, of course. We also have Steven Gerrard also managing one of the other Saudi teams. So what's happening essentially in Saudi Arabia is nothing less than a kind of revolution that's taking place. And what's extraordinary is that Saudi Arabia now is unrecognisable how it was even 3, 4, 5 years ago. Yeah. To how it is now. I mean, we have to understand that in the 1950s, with the US petrodollar, that the Saudis were pumping their extreme interpretation of Islam called Wahhabism around the world that helped to spread Islamic jihad around the world. We know that the Saudis were spending billions of money in teaching, for example, Islamic imams to preach their interpretation of Islam, which became violent. And of course, this kind of climaxed 22 years ago with those horrific events that occurred on 9/11, which we know had kind of Saudi influence, that Osama bin Laden was Saudi, came from a rich Saudi construction family. And today it seems that Saudi Arabia is going through an incredible modern transformation as a country, distancing itself from its extremist past, fearing that what they've created was essentially a Frankenstein that actually threatened the very Saudi dynasty itself. So we see this incredible modernisation drive by the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, and Prime Minister, to bring Saudi Arabia well into the 21st century. So let's have a kind of look at this one. So, for example, we see that Saudi Arabia has attracted to their Saudi Pro League Cristiano Ronaldo, Neymar, Benzema, the England international Jordan Henderson, contracts worth millions. Also, we see that the Saudis tried to buy Liverpool striker Mohammad Salah with a 150 million bid that was rejected, I think, last week. And we see now that Saudi Arabia is looking to bid for the 2034 World Cup in one of its venues yet to be built, the $1 trillion futuristic city of Neom. We see that this dystopian city of the future, this city is a multi-billion pound building project known as the Line. That would be a 110-mile skyscraper. That would be controlled by artificial intelligence and renewable energy. We see that the Saudis also spending billions to upgrade and develop their country with the vision known as 2030. And Saudi Arabia is also developing, becoming a tourist hub and has welcomed celebrity chefs as part of the Saudi food show back in June. And news is now that they're developing the prospects of normalisation and peace with Israel, which was literally unthinkable. But it's an incredible thing. I mean, I think this is partly due to the success of Qatar hosting the 2022 World Cup, that the Saudis are now desperate to hope the most prestigious world sporting tournament in the world, which is the World Cup.
Yeah, if Qatar can do it, Saudi definitely can, and Saudi has even more resources in terms of and even more in regards to stadia already in place. What lies behind their bid for World Cup 2034 is what we have to ask. According to Keelan Hughes, writing for the Sun newspaper on the 1st of September under the title Saudi Launch Campaign to Host 2034 World Cup with new $1 trillion megacity as host and winter tournament among options as well, which is what they did in Qatar. I think we'll probably be seeing more of that in coming years. The city of Neom was announced by Crown Prince Mohammad bin Salman in 2017 as part of the country's Vision 2030 with the aim to complete construction by the end of the decade. Saudi chiefs have begun to sound out senior figures in European football to secure backing for their bid, according to The Times. And it's been claimed that the Saudis are hopeful of staging the tournament in the summer with high-altitude venues an option under consideration. Of course, those would be cooler venues, but also there's a technology that's available to ensure a cooler stadiums, so it would not be boiling hot as such. However, again, a winter tournament hasn't been ruled out, as this was quite successful in 2022 when Qatar did this between November and December. And despite all of that outcry and whatnot over Qatar hosting it and over it being in the winter, it ran very, very smoothly. There was very, very little crime that was reported or committed, probably because people knew that there were extreme repercussions should there be. There was, of course, in these countries that there's any drunkenness is going to be treated very, very harshly. So they had designated areas for moderate consumption, and everyone seemed to have a good time. Aside from some of the other ethical issues, it went much better than many expected. That said, there is apprehension over the bid, with a lot of European states concerned over Saudi Arabia's human rights records. So the same issues that were there with Qatar are there with Saudi Arabia as well. And in European nations, of course, there's massive concern over their approach specifically to LGBTQ issues, which is a criminal offense in the Arab Kingdom. So I don't think we'll be seeing any rainbow armbands at such a World Cup.
No, well, yeah, this is the controversy, and there's also the controversy surrounding the Saudi consortium actually buying Newcastle United Football Club as well, and of course the big discussion about Jordan Henderson leaving the Liverpool captaincy to go and play in Saudi Arabia, and it raises these questions. Also, Saudi Arabia also had a bid together with Greece and Egypt to host the 2030 World Cup, but pulled out and gave their full attention to actually wanting to host the event in 2030 for themselves. And while it's believed that this may have been unsuccessful, the Saudis have made contact with other confederations to secure their sport. That includes the signing of a memorandums of understanding with African and Oceanic football confederations, as well as a number of national federations, including Ecuador, Ghana, India, and Singapore. And of course, anyone who's been following FIFA over the last decade or so know that there were huge amounts of bribes going to various countries to actually host the World Cup. Essentially, Qatar was won through bribes, and so was Russia in 2018. So, yeah, and we know that when it comes to Saudi Arabia, money is absolutely no expense. And that to host the 2034 World Cup, like Qatar did in the winter of 2022, would bring worldwide prestige to Saudi Arabia and would certainly massively open the country up to tourism. They would be the spotlight of world attention for over a month while that football tournament took place.
Now, they're going to also have an eye opening up for tourism, and this is already something that's taking place increasingly. You see more and more advertising in London, certainly on public transport. Previously, very rarely would see any advertisement for tourism to Saudi Arabia. Increasingly, you see it, and no longer just to those areas very popular in the Emirates and other areas. Saudi Arabia itself, which has always been a little bit distant for the West compared to UAE or Dubai, something like that. Now it's opening up. Even potentially, I mean, I know of some Israeli citizens who've already managed to visit Saudi Arabia, even while peace deals are still being talked about. So, I mean, that would have been unheard of, Simon, 5 years ago.
Even heard a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
So it shows the incredible transformation as well. I'm also seeing that the Saudi Pro League, it's their how they named their football league, as we call our own Premiership in England, has ambitions to actually even play in the Champions League. So we see that the Saudi Pro League has attracted global football headlines. They've attracted 5 times a Ballon d'Or winner, Cristiano Ronaldo, joined them from Manchester United in December of 2022. Since then, we've seen former Chelsea midfield player Conte signed by Al Ittihad, where he's being paid a staggering £85 million a year, followed by the French international and Real Madrid star Karim Benzema, who will pocket £172 million a year, and see what attracts them to Saudi Arabia. And saying while there is a football culture in Saudi, the average attendance at last year's Pro League matches was a small 9,339. Damsi, who finished 8th, playing a stadium with a capacity of only 5,000 people. Al Hilal, based at the 65,000 capacity King Fahd Stadium, attracted fewer than 10,000 fans. And Ronaldo plies his trade at Al Wa Park, which holds 25,000, and this is a far cry from Old Trafford or the Bernabeu.
Well, when I was in Iraq last year, they were showing on TV Saudi Pro League football, and I have to say, Simon, it was one of the most tedious things ever, because I turned and I literally thought the stadiums are empty. How are you? I mean, yes, they have 10,000 people maybe at some, but in a 65,000 capacity stadium, it's empty. You're looking and you're thinking, where is everyone? What is going on here? I even questioned whether or not there were still some bizarre COVID restrictions or something banning spectators in the country. And I looked and no, okay, yes, it can be very hot and whatnot in these climates, but I was thinking, how are these guys being paid? And I asked the question, sponsorships, oil, of course, and the fact that a lot of these owners, this is just recreation to them. It's just a game to them. They can expend it. These are not billionaires, these are trillionaires. And so they have their investments, they get enough returns. They're increasingly with Ronaldo, the amount of Al Nassr shirts that I'm seeing now in London, I even saw in the market in Israel, in both Arab and Jewish shops, Ronaldo Al Nassr shirts. Bizarre, you know. So you're looking at this global phenomena that is attracting players from the very, very best. I'm looking at it as kind of a intermediate MLS type scenario, where MLS, of course, has attracted the likes of Beckham and Messi, but the Pro League is actually attracting guys who still have a couple more years of prime quality football.
Well, the Saudis made headlines in the summer, back in August, when they tried to buy Kylian Mbappe, the French international, World Cup winner, and also striker for Paris Saint-Germain. So Al Hilal in the summer launched an audacious bid for the World Cup winner. And they were willing to offer Paris Saint-Germain £259 million for his services. But Mbappe himself would have been paid a staggering £600 million. That's not a one-off payment, that's a year. And that works out as 11.5 million a month. Astonishing funds. And then we also see the whole transfer dilemma regarding the Liverpool striker Mo Salah. And the pro-Saudi League want Mohammad Salah because he's from Egypt. They want a kind of Muslim Arab figurehead to front the Saudi League, and this is why I think in the end they even offered Liverpool 215 million for him. Considering he's 31, makes absolutely no sense. But what they're trying to do is build a brand, and a football brand with a global viewership to actually then rival the Premier League. And we're seeing this taking place now. And of course, they've also bought as well the Newcastle United Football Club as well, and that was from the Saudi Investment League. We also see that the Saudi Pro League have explored joining the Champions League. This is despite not playing in Europe. They currently compete in the Asian Football Confederations League, and in December in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia will host the Club Finals World Cup, where Man City will be competing to become the club world champions.
Yeah, and they're willing clearly to splash out cash as they seek to diversify and expand their economy through this. But beyond the element just of the growth of the Saudi Pro League, we have this focal point of Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia's vision, and that is this city of Neom. It truly is an incredible, futuristic city right in the desert. You see it there on your screen, sort of the impressions of what it's going to look like. The jewel in the crown for Mohammed bin Salman's 2030 vision to transform Saudi Arabia economically and socially by the end of the decade. It's a multi-billion-pound building project creating a line that will be a 110-mile skyscraper that will be run by artificial intelligence, able to predict what residents will want and need, which is bizarre and frightening at the same time and really incredible. There will be no need for cars because there's going to be a high-speed transportation system, some sort of Hyperloop type system that they have. This city of the future will have its own digital currency. Residents are going to be able to be constantly monitored by facial recognition cameras to manage the city's power and waste resources. The city will be run on renewable energy that will also include a floating city and a high-tech mountain resort.
Yeah, and this mountain resort that they want to make as one of the kind of venues for the 2034 World Cup. I mean, they already agreed to host the Asian Winter Games in 2029 in Neom. which is yet to be built, and they're wanting to use technology that's only just been invented, 3D printers and everything else. So the technology also to be carbon neutral as well. So we did back in October of last year, so that would be in 2022, do a whole entire program on the city of Neom. So if you want to go into more detail about this city, please look at our previous episode from a year ago.
This has already come under scrutiny from various sources across the world for awful human rights abuses against the Saudi tribesmen who have protested the massive building project. The question is this the Saudis' attempt to wean themselves off of oil production for their main source of revenue? So they're needing to diversify and expand their investments and what they're known for. This is definitely an ambitious project.
Yeah, I think, I mean, Mohammed bin Salman is certainly a visionary. And I think he actually then sees, for example, that in the 2030s, 2040s, we will no longer be using fossil fuels. And he feels, for example, that this is how the Saudis have made their fortune, is because of the oil coming out of the ground in Saudi Arabia from the 1920s onwards. And realizing the world is looking for alternative energy sources. So for example, Saudi Arabia could have all this oil and be stuck with it and can't sell it, which would then plunge the Saudi government and society into absolute ruin. So they want to use the revenue that they made from selling oil to diversify, to modernize the country, to make Saudi Arabia a modern hub. And of course, at the center of this is their futuristic dystopian city of Neom as a focal point. And we got an excellent CBN news report to go to now. It's called Why Saudi Arabia's Hidden Biblical History Could Be at Risk with the Building of This New Multi-Billion-Pound City Known as Neom.
For now, the northwest corner of Saudi Arabia is home to more camels than people. That would certainly change if Crown Prince Salman's ambitious plans come to fruition. The heir to the Saudi throne recently announced this region as the site of his new $500 billion megacity called Neom.
Imagine a traditional city and consolidating its footprint, designing to protect and enhance nature.
The goal is for up to 9 million people to live here in what's touted as the world's most modern, forward-thinking, and climate-friendly city. Few people, however, know about the deep biblical history of this area. Those who do wonder if the megaproject would help or harm the region's historic value. Andrew Jones has studied biblical archaeology for more than a decade. CBN followed him on a week-long adventure to some fascinating biblical sites, places almost everyone has read about, but few will ever get to see. Jones believes Mount Sinai is actually located here, very close to the proposed site of the new Saudi megacity.
So the biggest issue is that Moses, when he was taking care of Jethro's flocks, now that was his father-in-law, and when he had fled Egypt, he lived in the land of Midian. And the land of Midian is in north of Saudi Arabia. There is no archaeological evidence for Midian in the Sinai Peninsula. And it was on one of those days when he was out with the flocks that it says he went to the mountain of God in the book of Exodus. And it says he saw a burning bush on Mount Sinai. So then you'll realize that Mount Sinai is close to the home where Jethro lived in the land of Midian.
His theory is that after crossing the Red Sea, the Israelites would have wandered in this very desert. As the team retraced their steps, it was easy to see why water was foremost in their minds. After the Israelites crossed the Red Sea in the end of Exodus chapter 15, it says that they came to the oasis called Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees. Well, those 12 springs are still here. Here's one of them behind me that's been cemented in over the years, but it's still used by the Bedouins in this area to this day. But will the new Saudi mega project threaten this history?
There's a city they call the Line, which would go from the coast all the way up into the mountains of Midian. And they just announced this next city, which is up in the mountains of Jebel al-Lawz. This whole mountain range we believe to be the mountain of God. And so you will find, as you're driving around the desert, these brand new roads that they're putting in, and this whole camp set up for the workers. So it's a multi-year project. We're just hoping that they don't not just ruin the view, but destroying anything of biblical significance out there.
After more off-roading, we came upon this site, a huge mountain with a peak that appears burned.
The evidence is all around us that this is the true Mount Sinai. Now, I know there are many proposed locations for the mountain of God, but this mountain here in the land of Midian is the only one that matches all the biblical evidence for Mount Sinai, or the mountain of God, or another name is Mount Horeb.
This large plain at the base of the mountain would have easily accommodated the Israelites and all their animals, and Jones tells us more.
Ron White discovered these pieces of marble when he first came here in the mid-1980s. In 1985, he found on one of the sections, written in ancient Hebrew, the name Solomon, the mountain of God, Moses. And so he believed, because of these key words, that King Solomon actually set up a marble shrine dedicated to the mountain of God at the base of Mount Sinai.
And look at this, a large altar centrally placed and covered with petroglyphs. Many of the images depict cows, an animal that in ancient times did not exist out here, but did exist in Egypt. If this is the real Mount Sinai, there was no way I was leaving here without climbing it. The Saudi government has big plans for this whole area, hoping to make it an oasis of modern comfort. But I like it just the way it is, and seeing it with my own eyes made the Exodus story come alive.
Wow, I made it. This is the top of Jebel Musa, the mountain of Moses, where God came down and met with Moses to give him the 10 Commandments. What a hike, what a sight. It took about 2.5 hours to get up here, and it was almost 3 miles from where we parked the car, but it was worth every step. And you know, I don't think we'll ever be able to say definitively whether or not this is the actual spot where Moses met with God, but I guess that's just where faith comes in.
From northern Saudi Arabia, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
Always thankful to our friends at CBN for their helpful perspective. Now, let's talk a little bit about the economic development and expansion in Saudi Arabia that's going forward. In 2017, the Saudis completed their work on the King Abdullah Financial District with a cluster of 10 skyscrapers that cost $6.3 billion. There are plans to expand this 9 times the size, according to the Daily Mail. The Saudis have plans to develop their airport in the capital city of Riyadh with 6 runways to cater for 120 million passengers a year, which is absolutely staggering. What can't be lost on this, and you mentioned the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is quite visionary, and he's looking to the future. He's seeking to progress Saudis' interest abroad. That has to include a targeting of young Saudis and making sure that there is a sense where individuals in Saudi Arabia of a certain age are even proud to be there and from there to some degree.
No, absolutely, and why is this also so significant as well is that 70%, for example, of the Saudi population is under the age of 35.
Yeah.
So Saudi Arabia is going through an incredible transformation for being at the centre of Islamic extremism and exporting Islamic extremism around the world, and terrorism as well. We see here that it's a total transformation going on in Saudi society, and this is what we see. There's a lot of criticism of the Saudi regime, particularly of MBS in particular, and people overlook the incredible transformation that Saudi Arabia is going through. The fact that the Saudis have are casting off their garments of Islamic extremism that they've held for absolute decades and exporting it, I think, is incredible. We see that when President Donald Trump was in power, he geared up US foreign policy for the Middle East to be focused on 2 countries. That was Israel and Saudi Arabia. And yet, despite all of this, probably because on issues relating to social progressive issues, we see the incredible hostility from the Biden administration towards the Saudi government. I think that doesn't really kind of reflect the incredible changes that have gone on in Saudi Arabia under Mohammed bin Salman.
Yeah, according to Mike Keegan, writing for the Daily Mail on the 9th of August, under its aims, children, or at least young people, have been identified as Saudi Arabia's future. You've already mentioned 70% of the population being under 35. It's the 7th biggest country in the world for social media usage. And so a lot of the publicity for Neom, I first actually came across Neom on social media, not because friends shared it, but because Saudi has paid for ads to advertise it to the whole free world. And so I'm seeing these ads for this city. At first I thought, oh, this is a strange VR experience, or some, one of these weird escape room type thing.
It still could be that.
It could morph into that very definitely. But I clicked play and I thought, sorry, what? This is a real project. I even looked at the website. I was trying to find. I thought this is going too far in terms of its realism. I just want to know what this is, where it is, what the prices are in terms of like this experience, and then I realized, no, this is a real city. That was several years ago, and that's advanced now. We did the program, as we've already said, last year, and now we're having this advanced discussion on it. Social media abounds. Eyes are fixed on screens everywhere you go in Riyadh. YouTube, get this, YouTube, this is YouTube's #1 country for content consumption.
Incredible, no?
Amazing. I mean, Simon, if there was sort of apologetics, gospel-centered type stuff in Arabic that was marketed and presented in a particular way, to attract these individuals, these young people in Saudi Arabia, is what a mission field. It's been very closed off. It's been very difficult, but YouTube may be the way in, may be a way of reaching many of these. Well, traditional metrics are on the rise. Al Nasser's attendances grew 149%. year on year following the arrival of Cristiano Ronaldo from 8,121. We've talked about the lower numbers of people previously. Well, now they have 17,638. The impact on more modern formats has been truly significant. The Portuguese star has blazed the trail, but now there's been a 200% rise in the number of women and girls discussing the Pro League on Twitter. The growth not just limited to football. We also have boxing. Who can forget that Saudi hosted Anthony Joshua's 2 fights, very recent fights. Here, officials saying that the number of boxing gyms grew from 7 to 48. There was a 300% growth in participation. So it's becoming a center for beyond football for other sports and athletics as well. Now, it can be said, and some will say, this is all just a bit of PR spin, and of course they're using their money to bring in the big names, but it is significant because it's changing the landscape in Saudi Arabia. It's bringing more people there for work, it's providing more jobs, it's also creating different sources of revenue for locals and internationals in Saudi alike. Now, those working in the sports industry in Saudi Arabia are adamant this isn't just about PR. They are pointing to surge in female participation. Previously would have been unheard of. There's now a netball federation, one of around 60 new sports that have arrived in the past decade. So all of this points to some sort of progression in the nation as a whole. Growing population entertained is another area. Keeping the growing population entertained is important to the country. It's important to its rulers because an entertained society that's enjoying itself, that has access, equal access as compared to other countries, is more likely to stay local. It's less likely to export itself. A 25-minute drive away from the center of Riyadh is Boulevard City. It's like Disney World, Epcot, and Universal Studios rolled into one, with a sprawling complex featuring air-conditioned streets, to keep the thousands of visitors cool. Something for everyone. Much space devoted to gaming. The site features a vast esports arena. As much as I don't like esports, and as much as I don't at all like the idea of esports becoming a commonplace thing, it is becoming a commonplace thing, and you have professional esport leagues now, and there are people who watch esports as well. Bizarre to me, but you know, I used to joke with one young friend of mine. He would be playing, you know, we would play FIFA, and he would beat me quite soundly, and he would be trash talking me a little bit and messing me about in that way. And I would say, well, at least I can play normal football. This is just a screen, you know, that's kind of my perspective on that. There's a gaming museum. Punters can play Sonic the Hedgehog on Sega Mega Drives and Tetris on Game Boys, bringing back the classics there. There's other zones, which include sport, where two of Riyadh's biggest clubs are building bars, and the theater, which brings a taste of Birmingham to the desert with a Peaky Blinders experience. Very, very weird. Another section features a giant 22,000 capacity arena capable of housing huge events, with some of the globe's biggest DJs playing in Saudi now, and the conservative religious boundaries being pushed at Sandstorm, which is essentially a rave in the desert. Wrestling's WWE brought its Super Showdown to Boulevard City as well, and this was previously developed and operated by PIF-owned Sela, who last season became Newcastle United's shirt sponsors in a £25 million a season deal, looking to transform an area outside St James Park into a fan zone.
Absolutely, and then we also have Ibrahim Seller, who's the Senior Vice President, explained the thinking behind it. He said, it's all about creating opportunities for the people of Saudi Arabia to be more active, enjoy fantastic entertainment, and contribute to the improvement of their overall quality of life. Now, sorry, but you have to understand where Saudi Arabia was 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, a very deeply religious, conservative, Islamist country, and now they're opening up themselves to the entire world, and this is thanks to the vision of Mohammed bin Salman and his vision for 2030. So let's have a look now, this excellent report put together by Chris Mitchell, who visits Saudi Arabia back in 2019 to unpack what is behind this incredible expansion and modernization of Saudi Arabia.
The major challenge facing Saudi Arabia is implementing Vision 2030. It's an ambitious plan to change Saudi Arabia from an oil-based economy to one based on business investment, technology, and tourism. CBN sat down with Saudi Arabia's Minister of Economy and Planning, Mohammad Al-Tawashi. Can you describe for us what Vision 2030 is?
The Vision 2030 is basically unlocking this potential of Saudi Arabia, diversifying away from oil, having a sustainable, growing economy, engaging the private sector, creating sustainable jobs for the locals, but also having a regional responsibility and a global responsibility as a good citizen of the world.
Dr. Yonatan Freeman of Hebrew University says Saudi Arabia can learn from Israel.
And I think Saudi Arabia is asking Israel, what's your secret? How could you be so successful internationally using your own mind and not some sort of natural resource? So I think what Saudi Arabia is going to learn from us is how do we move ahead without being dependent on just one natural resource.
One main focus of Vision 2030 is tourism. For the first time in its history, Saudi Arabia is allowing tourists from nearly 50 countries to apply for visas beginning this fall.
Tourism is one pillar where it ticks all the boxes. It ticks the diversification box, it ticks the jobs box, balance of payment, meaning people will come and spend money here.
One tourist attraction for people coming to Saudi Arabia would be here at Al Ula. It's the southern capital of the Nabatean people and a UNESCO heritage site. It was part of the ancient trade routes more than 2,000 years ago. Amir Badani is the CEO of the Al Ula Royal Commission.
A place that hasn't been visited, hasn't been studied, and we are committed to fully understand it, preserve it, and share it with the world through an interpretation strategy that turns Al-Ula into a one large, engaging living museum. This is basically the largest living museum in the world today.
But in addition to economic changes, there are dramatic changes in society. One major change in Saudi society can be seen here at this soccer match. Just more than a year ago, for the first time, women were permitted to attend games of the most popular sport in the country. The stadium includes this family section, where husbands with their wives, mothers with their children, or single women can come and enjoy the game. It's another barrier broken as part of Vision 2030.
In the end, what we're seeing all over the Muslim and Arab world is that more and more the local population wants their countries to push for increasing the welfare of those citizens in their countries, to be more open to the outside world.
But the changes come with challenges.
One thing that Saudi Arabia has to make sure is that the more they open up, it doesn't cause too much of a challenge by those who are opposed to any sort of approachment with the West, approachment with other religions like Christians. So one of the things that the regime has to be certain about is that they do it gradually.
And the threat of Iran overshadows this economic revolution. On September 14th, Iran targeted Saudi Arabia's main oil processing facility. It cut Saudi's oil production drastically for weeks. But the vision expects to change Saudi society, cut dependence on oil, and offer a new Saudi Arabia to the world. Amir Ahmad Banaja is the CEO of the General Entertainment Authority,
which has a very exciting mission, which is to basically build the entertainment sector in Saudi Arabia.
Banaja works on long-term entertainment projects like Qadiyah, a Six Flags amusement park to be built just outside of Riyadh, the Red Sea Project, developing Saudi Arabia's coastline, and Neom, built as a city of the future. Neom, located here on the shores of the Red Sea, is the largest mega project in the world today, with an estimated cost of $500 billion. And it's the centerpiece for Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030. And all part of what Saudi is now opening and offering to the world.
I think that there is a lot to discover about Saudi Arabia and the diversity and colorfulness. I think people think of Saudi Arabia as hot, camels, sand. I think this is very monotonic view. I encourage everybody to think about Saudi Arabia the way you think about the US. California is nothing like Florida, you know? Utah is nothing like Kansas. So there is a lot of beauty and details. I think the world will come to see the largest living museum in the world being unveiled.
Whether or not Saudi Arabia can achieve Vision 2030 or not will deeply affect the future of the Middle East. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia.
Well, very thankful again for the very helpful and fascinating report by our friend Chris Mitchell on CBN. We need to talk, Simon, about how all of this fits in with Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi Crown Prince's vision for 2030. He said, "It's my pleasure to present Saudi Arabia's vision for the future. It's an ambitious yet achievable blueprint which expresses our long-term goals and expectations and reflects our country's strengths and capabilities. All success stories start with a vision, and successful visions are based on strong pillars. The first pillar of our vision is our status as the heart of the Arab and Islamic worlds. We recognize that Allah the Almighty has bestowed on our lands a gift more precious than oil. Our kingdom is the land of the two holy mosques, the most sacred sites on earth, in the direction of the Kaaba, to which more than 1 billion Muslims turn at prayer. The second pillar of our vision is our determination to become a global investment powerhouse. Our nation holds strong investment capabilities, which we will harness to stimulate our economy and diversify our revenues. The third pillar is transforming our unique strategic location into a global hub connecting 3 continents, Asia, Europe, and Africa. Our geographic position between key global waterways makes the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia an epicenter of trade and the gateway to the world. A vibrant society, a thriving economy, and an ambitious nation, and these are the 3 pillars of Saudi Arabia's mapped out expansion of its 2030 vision. But the question is, this the right move by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman? His 2030 vision, including reduced carbon emissions and economic diversification. The Vision 2030 has been mapped out as a plan for the kingdom's reduced dependency on oil and for trailblazing the use of renewable energy sources. He wants to transform this Middle Eastern country into one of the world's next big hubs for science and technology. And if the pace continues uninterrupted within the next 10 years, Saudi Arabia will be better recognized as a place that leads global efforts for advanced intelligence and cutting-edge innovation than as a land of conflicts. It's true that Saudi Arabia has an oil-based economy with strong government controls over major economic and social activities, possessing about 16% of the world's proven petroleum reserves, and oil is the cornerstone of its development. But Vision 2030 is built upon three pillars: a vibrant society, a thriving economy, and an ambitious nation. The first theme being vital to achieving the vision and a strong foundation for economic prosperity, including urbanism, culture and entertainment, sports and UNESCO heritage sites. The second, calling for thriving economy with opportunities for all by building an education system aligned with market needs. Now, it's interesting, Simon, that all of this, though, it does find its rooting. Mohammed bin Salman places all of this progress still very firmly under the umbrella of Islam.
But that means essentially what he's proposing essentially is a reformation of Islam.
Essentially.
If Saudi Arabia, which it does, holds the two most holiest sites in the Islamic religion, i.e. Mecca and Medina, then through holding Mecca and Medina, they're able to have a huge influence over the Sunni Muslim population around the world and take that jihadi element out of the religion and replace it with a more pragmatic reformation process. And this is exactly what he's doing, and this is why also we see the prospects of the Saudis reaching out to Israel, which they would never have done before. So we see that the nature of Islam is changing in the Middle East. We see, for example, the hostility by the Iranian public against the Islamic Republic of Iran's government and its leadership because they reject Islam. Mosques are closing at an incredible rate. We also saw, for example, the Egyptian people 10 years ago, back in 2023, push back the government of the Muslim Brotherhood with over 300,000 people taking to the streets to protest the removal of this government. So what we're seeing essentially in the Middle East is this rejection of Islamic extremism, but a kind of new vision for the region based on science and technology, and also using sport as a means to bring about that change and innovation within Saudi society. And also, I think as well, is a clear rejection on behalf of the young people of the Middle East to embrace these radical Islamist ideologies. And this is what makes this other aspect even more interesting. We will do an entire behind the headlines on this one, and that's the prospect of a new Israeli-Saudi peace deal. There's not only a peace agreement that would actually lead to normalisation. So according to the US think tank, the Defense for the Foundation of Democracies based in Washington, D.C., believe that a peace and normalisation agreement could be just around the corner. The Wall Street Journal reported that Washington and the Saudis have agreed on the broad contours of a deal for the Saudis to actually recognise Israel.
And according to the US think tank, the Defense for Foundation of Democracies based in Washington, D.C., they believe that this normalization agreement that's being pursued could be just around the corner.
No, absolutely. So also we see here, for example, that the Saudis are laying the foundations for peace so that when a diplomatic breakthrough becomes possible, the new relationship has a foundation on which it can rest upon. Diplomatic statements, positive local media coverage, tolerance towards people-to-people interactions, and changes in textbooks all preparing the Saudi public for a potential normalization deal with the Jewish state. Traditionally, the Saudis have adopted an unfriendly, hostile stance towards Israel due to its conflict with the Palestinians. Clerics in Friday's sermons would lash out at Washington and Israel over the plight of the Palestinians. Conspiracy theories about Israel abounded. And in 2011, the Saudi newspapers claimed that a vulture was caught inside the kingdom spying for the Israeli Mossad. And in May 2022, a report from the Institute for the Monitoring of Peace and Cultural Tolerance in School Education noted that Saudi textbooks still erase Israel from the map and associate Zionism with threats to Muslim religious sites, etc. But since the signing of the Abraham Accords, entire chapters and several examples of Jew hatred have been completely removed.
Which is really, really good and reassuring news. Over the past year, there's been numerous signs of open warming. Last fall, Riyadh hosted Samir Haj Yahya, chairman of Israel's Bank Leumi, as a panelist at the Saudi Investor Forum. Yahya described amazing opportunities in the Desert Kingdom. As a result, Simon, I've seen videos of various consortiums, even of ultra-Orthodox, with Saudis dancing, singing together, feasting together. Really, it's great to see things changing in that direction. Oh, we have yet another news report that we want you to benefit from. How close is Saudi recognition of Israel? Netanyahu can taste it.
Top Israeli officials are set to hold meetings at the White House after the U.S. and Saudi Arabia reportedly agreed to a broad outline for a deal in which Saudi Arabia would recognize Israel. But the Saudis are asking a lot, not only for Israeli help in the creation of an independent Palestinian state, but U.S. security guarantees and help creating a civilian nuclear program. White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby, speaking off-camera in a virtual press briefing, said a deal is not close at hand.
Quite frankly, just to be blunt here, I think the reporting has left some people with the impression that discussions are farther along and closer to some sense of certainty than they actually are.
But former Israeli ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, says he believes Saudi Arabia is likely to join the Abraham Accords and normalize ties with Israel within the next year. While former U.S. ambassador to Israel, Martin Indyk, compared the complexity of the deal to a Rubik's Cube.
This three-way deal, which is what it will be between Israel, the United States, and Saudi Arabia if it comes about, it's kind of like a Rubik's Cube. There's so many moving pieces that have to be put into place in an intricate diplomatic dance.
Dr. Ariel Cohen of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center said all the demands made by the Saudis will make a deal difficult.
The Saudis, the prince, he wanted nuclear technology with very few strings attached to be provided to Saudi Arabia, enrichment of uranium. He wanted an ironclad guarantee that if Saudi Arabia is attacked by Iran, the United States will step in and go to war for the kingdom.
Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid has told U.S. lawmakers he opposes any normalization agreement, but Indyk says a deal is a high priority for all three governments.
There is a sense of urgency. And what's important about this is not only that the sense of urgency appears to be matched by Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, but of course it's matched by Prime Minister Netanyahu, which for him is one of his most important foreign policy priorities now. He can taste the possibility of peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia.
The White House wants to complete the deal before the presidential election season heats up. Some think that's too soon, and that any deal will have to wait until after the 2024 election. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
And, you know, this is the long-awaited peace deal that Israel's been waiting for, one with Saudi Arabia, which will be a total game changer in the Middle East. But, Regan, the big question is, when we look at the Middle East and we look at these key developments, particularly as we've looked at what's happening in Saudi Arabia with Mohammed bin Salman's 2030 vision, focusing on the city of Neom, hosting the World Cup. Now, like, where does this fit in terms of Bible prophecy? And where I can see it fitting in is in terms of Ezekiel 38 and 39, and how Israel is at peace and living in security, doesn't have any borders, because we know that Israel's enemies have come to a place where they make peace with Israel. And if, for example, the Saudis, I don't question is if, a question of when the Saudis make peace with Israel, this is going to completely and totally transform the entire Middle East, and that Israel could then enter into that time of complacency, when Israel effectively dismantles its military forces, the IDF, massively invests in its economy and becomes one of the world's, if not the world's leading economy. And we can see this happening with exactly what's happening with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, very much, very much so. We have spoken on many occasions on Behind the Headlines before of how there does need to be some form of vestige of peace that individuals will look at and say, okay, there's peace now, and yet there is no peace, because at some point in time, even when it looks like everything is fine and sorted and there's maybe a borderline utopia, that's when there will be coming disaster, there will be war, and we see that a lot of those events that are prophesied will be occurring. But there's much hope, because it's at that time that we see there will be a turning to Jesus as Messiah. We see also that the prophets speak of a reconciliation of Arabia to the one true God as well. He speaks of Arabia, his son. And so there's going to be a day when, as the scriptures promise, every eye will see, every knee will bow, and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord.
Amen. And thank you for watching tonight's Behind the Headlines, as we've unpacked the fact that the Saudis could host the World Cup in 2034, going through an incredible process of modernisation, and seeing that Saudi Arabia is about to put itself on the world map as a cultural centre for science and technology. Absolutely extraordinary. So I want to thank you for watching this week's edition of Behind the Headlines.